I never thought love could make me feel small. When I met Jenna, I wasn't looking for fireworks or some grand love story. I just wanted something real. She came into my life like a summer storm. Beautiful, thrilling, unpredictable. And I welcomed it. I welcomed her. From the beginning, I gave her all of me. My time, my patience, my full heart. She didn't have to ask for my loyalty. She had it, unconditionally. For a while, that was enough. In the early days, I loved how fiercely independent she was. She made her own rules, chased her own dreams. It was magnetic, intoxicating even. And I admired her for it. I'd show up for her no matter what, through work stress, her impulsive mood swings, and every self-imposed crisis she conjured. I was the calm to her chaos. I thought that made us good for each other. But love, when one-sided, becomes a slow kind of erosion. At first, it was subtle. She'd cancel plans at the last minute without apology. I'd bring her flowers and she'd glance at them, like I handed her a receipt. My affection, once met with warmth, began to bounce off her like rain against glass. Still, I stayed. I believed that if I just loved her harder, more completely, she'd come back to me, emotionally, spiritually, wholly. She didn't. Instead, she began testing limits. She'd make snide jokes about how emotional guys are kind of pathetic, then laugh it off, watching for my reaction. She'd go out with friends and not text me for hours, sometimes a whole night. If I brought it up, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was being needy. "God, Ben, I'm not your property," she once snapped. No, she wasn't mine, but I was hers, fully, willingly. Over time, it became clear. She mistook my love for weakness. She saw my patience as passivity, my forgiveness as spinelessness. The fact that I never raised my voice, never gave up on her, never demanded more than she was willing to give, that to her was weakness. She didn't see how much strength it took to love someone who didn't know how to love you back. I was the man who held her when her world fell apart, who made her soup when she was sick, ran errands when she was too tired, told her she was beautiful on the days she couldn't stand her reflection. I showed up, over and over again, and she kept tallying how much she could take before I'd finally break. I didn't realize I was fading, that I was slowly becoming someone I no longer recognized. Quiet, resentful, empty. But love does that when it isn't met halfway. It hollows you out. And even then, I stayed. Because that's what I thought strength was. Staying. Turns out I was wrong. I wish I could say there was one defining moment where everything shattered. But the truth is, it was a slow unraveling, a quiet kind of erosion that wore away at my spirit, day by day. Disrespect doesn't always show up as yelling or slamming doors. Sometimes it's in the silence, in the things left unsaid, in the casual disregard that creeps in like a shadow. Jenna began to treat me like an afterthought. Not maliciously at first, just carelessly. She'd make plans without telling me, not out of rebellion, but because she simply didn't consider me part of the equation anymore. Friends' weekends, work dinners, spontaneous getaways. I found out about most of them through social media or offhand comments. When I asked about it, she would brush it off with a tired laugh, like I was being dramatic. "You're always so sensitive, Ben," she'd say, sipping her wine and scrolling through her phone. "Why do you always take everything so personally?" It was like I was asking for too much just by wanting to be included in her life. She used to tell me everything, the little wins at work, the drama between her friends, her dreams, her doubts. But that began to change. Her thoughts became hers alone, guarded, distant. I would catch her smiling at texts she wouldn't let me see, or taking calls in the other room. When I asked who it was, she'd give vague answers like, "Just someone from the office," and walk away as if that settled it. And I started noticing how often I was being used as a convenience. She leaned on me when it benefited her, when her car broke down, when her rent was late, when she needed emotional support after a tough day. I was her rock, her constant, her backup plan. But when it came time to celebrate my wins, to listen to my bad days, to show up for me, she was tired, distracted, or simply unavailable. The imbalance began to feel undeniable. I remember one weekend, I'd spent hours putting together a surprise dinner for her birthday, cooked her favorite meal from scratch, set the table, dimmed the lights, even bought her a small gift. Something personal I knew she'd love. She walked in over an hour late, tipsy from drinks with coworkers, and barely acknowledged the effort. "Oh," she said, looking at the table, "you didn't have to do all this." Then she collapsed onto the couch and asked if we could just order sushi instead. I didn't say anything. I just smiled weakly and nodded. But inside, something cracked. That was the moment I realized her appreciation wasn't just missing, it had dried up completely. She didn't see me anymore. Not really. Not as a man who deserved care and reciprocity. I was just there. Always available, always giving, always waiting for her to remember that I mattered too. Then there were the subtle digs, the offhanded comments that sounded like jokes, but cut deeper than she realized. "You're too nice, Ben. That's your problem. Sometimes I wish you'd just grow a spine and fight with me. You're too boring, predictable." She'd laugh afterward, but there was a truth behind her smile. It wasn't playful teasing. It was contempt dressed up in sarcasm. And I let it go. Again and again. Not because I was weak, but because I loved her. Because I believed relationships went through seasons. Because I thought that if I just stayed steady, if I just kept being kind, she would remember why she fell in love with me in the first place. But the more I gave, the more she took. And not once did she stop to ask what I needed. Not once did she say thank you. Not once did she check in to see if I was okay. There's a loneliness that exists in being next to someone who doesn't really see you. You begin to question your worth. You begin to wonder if you're asking for too much, if maybe love really is supposed to feel like this. Like an endless audition for someone else's attention. I started losing parts of myself trying to win her back. And that's when the resentment crept in. Not explosive, not loud, but slow and suffocating. I resented the way I let her minimize me. I resented the way I excused her behavior, telling myself she was just stressed, just tired, just misunderstood. And most of all, I resented the man I saw in the mirror every morning. Exhausted, dimmed, emotionally bankrupt. That wasn't me. At least it wasn't who I used to be, but even then, I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. It didn't happen in a blaze of fury. There wasn't some cinematic showdown or dramatic exit. The moment of clarity came quietly, in the kind of silence that makes everything else in your life suddenly make sense. We were sitting on the couch one Sunday evening. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. I'd asked Jenna if she wanted to take a walk. Something simple, just the two of us. The weather was perfect, and I thought maybe we could reconnect, like we used to. She didn't even look up from her phone. "I'm tired," she muttered. "Go if you want." That should have been an ordinary moment, something insignificant, easily brushed off. But it wasn't. I stared at her for a long time, realizing how far we'd drifted, and more painfully how hard I'd tried to close a distance she had no interest in shortening. I got up, went to the kitchen, and just stood there. I watched the shadows move across the tiles. That's when it hit me. Not in a single thought, but in a flood of memories. Remembered the version of myself that used to laugh loudly. The man who found joy in simple things. Cooking a good meal, surprising someone he loved, getting lost in a good book. The man who didn't question his worth every time a woman dismissed his feelings. I remembered that man, and I realized how much of him I had lost. Over time, love had become a negotiation of self-respect, and I'd been giving up pieces of myself just to keep the illusion alive. I thought of the dinners I made that went untouched, the messages I sent that went unread, the compliments I gave that were met with silence, the arguments I avoided just to keep the peace, even though it meant swallowing my own hurt. And worst of all, I remembered the way I had started making excuses. For her, for the way she treated me, for why I stayed. It wasn't about one fight. It wasn't about the forgotten birthdays or the passive-aggressive remarks or the way she used to flirt with other men just to get a reaction out of me. It was the pattern. The consistent, quiet erosion of mutual respect. The way she took and took, never realizing or caring that she was slowly draining the life out of me. That night, while she scrolled through her phone and I stood in the kitchen, something inside me settled. Not in anger, not in heartbreak, in clarity. I was done making myself small to keep someone else comfortable. I was done waiting for love to come back to me, like some lost dog that wandered off and might return if I stood still long enough. Love shouldn't be something you have to chase within the person who claims to care for you. It should flow freely, even in the hard times, especially in the hard times. I walked back into the living room and sat down beside her. "Do you love me?" I asked calmly. No accusations, no edge in my voice. She paused, slowly lowering her phone. "What kind of question is that?" "It's a simple one," I replied. "Do you love me?" "Not out of habit, not out of comfort, not because I'm convenient. Do you actually love me?" She didn't answer right away. I watched her try to come up with the right thing to say, something that would smooth it over, keep the status quo intact. But the silence between us was too loud. And in that pause, I saw the truth. She didn't know. Or maybe she didn't care to know. And in that realization, something inside me let go. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I didn't ask her to try harder or meet me halfway. I simply stood up and nodded. I think I've got my answer. It wasn't just about her response. It was about everything that had led up to that moment. I finally understood that my love hadn't been weak. It had been patient. It had been hopeful. It had given chance after chance, grace after grace. But there comes a time when even the strongest love must stop trying to convince someone of its worth. Walking away, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken either. I felt awake. For the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe without the weight of waiting. I could think without the fog of confusion. I had stopped asking myself what else I could do to be enough for someone who had already decided that I wasn't. That was my moment of clarity. Not an explosion, not a scream, but the soft, steady realization that I had given everything I could, and that the strongest thing I could do now was leave. The morning I left Jenna, there was no slammed door, no dramatic exit, no final monologue meant to guilt or shock her. There was only stillness, a kind of sacred quiet that had been absent from my life for far too long. And in that silence, I made a decision, not out of bitterness, not out of vengeance, but out of deep, unwavering self-respect. I woke up before sunrise. Jenna was still asleep beside me, curled away from me, as usual. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the floor, listening to her soft breathing. My heart didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, still bruised, yes, but no longer burdened by doubt or confusion. I'd already packed a small duffel the night before. Just the basics. A few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, the journal I'd kept locked in my drawer, and a book I'd been trying to read for months, but could never seem to focus on in her presence. I didn't pack out of anger. I wasn't fleeing. I was stepping out of something that no longer held me, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself to her. She wouldn't understand anyway. Not really. I made coffee quietly, the way I always did. It was muscle memory at this point. Fill the kettle, grind the beans, the scent filling the kitchen like a gentle ritual. I sipped from my mug as the sun started to rise, casting pale orange light across the countertops. That moment of peace was a gift to myself. A reminder that calm, clarity, and simplicity still existed outside the storm I'd allowed myself to live in for too long. I left a note. Nothing poetic, just honest. Jenna, I'm not angry. I just can't keep pretending this is love. I deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. I've tried everything I know how to do. And now, I'm doing the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm walking away. Because I still respect myself enough to know when it's time. Please don't call. Not right now. Ben. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't say I'd miss her. Those words would have softened the message, and this wasn't a time for softness. This was a time for truth. I folded the note and left it on the kitchen table, next to the mug she always used, the one with the chip in the rim that she never bothered to replace. It felt symbolic somehow, leaving the note next to that flaw she'd grown used to, just like she'd grown used to me. As I stepped out the door, I didn't look back. Not out of pride, not out of spite, just certainty. I had given more than enough. I had bent until I almost broke, and now I was done. I walked down the quiet street to my car, the early morning air cool against my skin. It felt strange to be moving through the world without her orbiting around me, but not in a painful way. It felt new, like I'd taken off a heavy coat I hadn't realized I'd been wearing all summer. People often assume that leaving a relationship means you've stopped loving the person. But that's not always true. I loved Jenna, even when she hurt me, even when she made me feel invisible. But love is not supposed to cost you your soul. It should never be something that you give until you're empty, only to receive silence in return. I think that's the hardest lesson of all. That love, even when it's genuine, isn't always enough. And that walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally understood your worth. Over the next few days, I didn't reach out. I didn't check her social media. I didn't answer her texts when they came. Short at first, confused, then angry, then pleading. I had nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. She could try to rewrite the story in her mind, paint me as the one who gave up, who walked away. But I knew the truth. I hadn't given up. I had held on longer than I should have. Leaving wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing I'd ever done. Because it takes strength to stop begging for crumbs when you know you deserve the feast. It takes courage to stand up, gather your dignity, and walk away from a table where love is no longer being served. I found a small rental a few miles away. Nothing extravagant. Just a place where I could breathe again. A place where I could listen to my own thoughts without the static of her disappointment. And in the quiet of that empty apartment, I began rebuilding. Not out of anger, but out of love for myself. And I knew, somewhere deep down, that she would feel it eventually. The absence. The difference. The space I once filled, now hollow and echoing with everything she took for granted. But by the time she noticed, I would already be gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, irrevocably. And she would realize far too late that love was never my weakness. It was my gift, and I had finally stopped giving it to the wrong person. The silence after I left Jenna wasn't immediate. For the first couple of days, my phone buzzed frequently. At first, her messages were short and casual, as if she hadn't read the note or didn't take it seriously. Hey, when are you coming home? Did you take your charger? Let's talk. But when I didn't reply, the tone shifted. The text turned sharp, defensive. You're really going to walk out like that? This is childish, Ben. You could have at least talked to me face to face. You're being dramatic. Then came the silence. No more buzzing. No more words. For a while, I expected her to show up at my door or call late at night. She didn't. And I realized she wasn't used to being ignored. She had always assumed I'd come back. Because I always had. I had forgiven, overlooked, endured. Until I didn't. The days stretched on, quieter than I was used to, but peaceful. There was no tension in the air. No waiting for the next sigh. The next dismissive glance. The next argument disguised as a conversation. I missed the version of Jenna I had fallen in love with, but I no longer missed the woman she'd become. It's strange the way healing starts. Not with grand moments, but in small, steady ways. The first time I laughed out loud watching a movie alone. The first night I slept through, without waking up in a haze of anxiety. The first time I cooked for myself, not to impress anyone, not to please, just because I wanted to. And yet, a part of me still wondered if she'd ever understand why I left. That answer came 2 weeks later in the form of a voicemail. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Tired. I didn't think you'd actually go, she said. I thought you were just trying to make a point. I thought you'd cool off and come back. But now that the house is this quiet, I get it. I really get it. I treated your love like a given. Like something I could withdraw from endlessly without making deposits. I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't see what I had until it was gone. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Not because it meant nothing, but because it came too late. The truth is, I wasn't angry with Jenna anymore. I wasn't holding on to bitterness or pain. I had carried all of that for too long, and putting it down felt too good to ever pick back up. What I felt now was a kind of calm, a quiet understanding of how things ended and why they had to. Jenna had mistaken my love for weakness. She'd seen my loyalty as something she could exploit without cost. But walking away was the strongest thing I'd ever done. Not just for myself, but for the version of me that had been lost in that relationship. The man who once believed that love meant enduring anything, even your own unhappiness. I'd finally learned that love without respect is not love. It's dependency. It's erasure. And I was done erasing myself just to stay. She would remember me now, not as the man she thought she could keep around no matter how she treated him, but as the one who finally chose peace over chaos, self-worth over habit. And that memory would linger far longer than any fight we ever had. As for me, I wasn't looking back. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need another conversation or apology. I had given everything I could, and I left with my dignity intact. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't holding on, it's letting go and meaning it.